welcome to Up Close with Carlos Sang, celebrating art, entertainment, and the human spirit. Zubin Varla, thank you so much for joining
Hi,
us.
Carlos, pleasure.
The last time you were here at the National was, of course, for Dara, just under 10 years ago. And now you're back here for A Tupperware of Ashes. How does it feel to be, back at the National Theatre doing another brand new show?
Technically, Dara was not the last time I was here. I have just been here last year. I did the Odyssey Underworld Public Acts show. So it was lovely to be back then. That was in the Olivier. So yes, but it's great to be back. It's a lovely house, beautiful theatres.
Yeah, that's amazing, of course. And, since Dara done, a very interesting range of work, both classic text and contemporary text as well, things like Fun Home and the two character play. How do you go about, choosing what projects you want to pursue?
I think I'm not always choosing them. I get offered them, which is very lovely. So it's not always a case of being able to pick and choose. It sometimes needs must. But it's just the characters, it's the parts and the plays. And I do love challenging writing, new writing, which deals with contemporary issues, or even as with two character play. Writing that is highly unusual, acrobatic, exercise for the mind and for the ears. That's a joy to do, and for the body. I remember when we were doing two character play, I read somebody saying, an American saying that, in a sense, their Tennessee Williams exercises the mind and the actor's athleticism in the same way that Shakespeare does. And and then somebody else was saying that you don't actually begin to understand the demands of Tennessee Williams until you start speaking it out loud, which is exactly what I found to be
Yeah.
true. That on the page, two character play was incredibly inventive, highly original, but also very difficult to understand and keep track of what was going on at certain points. When we started playing it, Kate and I,
Yeah.
with Sam's input, and we started, playing in that room, physically and in the speaking of the text, it has a kind of magical effect on you. It starts to do something to you without you knowing exactly what's happening. And
Yes.
that's great writing.
Yes. And I suppose with the two character players was an interesting time. We were just coming out of the
That's
pandemic.
right,
So, you
yeah.
were playing to a socially distanced audience.
That's right, with lots of cut-out pictures of it being at the Hampstead to fill the audience. So that was it was a shame. I think that more people didn't get to see two character play because it's an extraordinary work.
Mm. It really was. I suppose, coming to A Tupperware of Ashes now, Tanika Gupta and Pooja Ghai, they
Yeah,
previously worked together on The
yeah.
Empress. Were you fairly familiar with their work previously as well? And
No, so terribly, no, terribly. Didn't see The Empress. Knew of Pooja,
mm,
and I'd worked with Tanika because she adapted or worked with Emma Rice on the adaptation of Midsummer Night's Dream that we did at the Globe Theatre in Emma's first season. So Tanika was involved in sort of cutting and adapting and adding to Shakespeare, augmenting Midsummer Night's Dream in that way. So yeah, I spent plenty of time with Tanika on that and got to know how wonderful she is.
what was your first reaction to reading the script when you first received it?
It's so much. There's so much going on again in this play because obviously we're mid rehearsals, so we're full of it at the minute. Funny,
Mm,
very beautiful. I actually see it in many ways as a love story, a beautiful love story about a sort of losing your beloved and refinding your beloved. Obviously, it's about, I don't know how much you know about the subject matter of the play, but obviously it's about somebody being diagnosed with dementia and then
mm,
eventually their demise and death from dementia. What that does in terms of destroying a human being and destroying their family, those in relationships with them, their loved
mm,
ones. So it's very so all that was distressing, beautiful, very funny.
mm,
It's very funny at times, and it also gets quite abstract. It gets quite magical. It sort of breaks out from the purely realist into something more poetic, shall we say, something every now and again more magical. which could be seen, it does a very clever balancing act of encouraging an audience to view what's happening in more than one way. You could view it as just the inner workings of a mind that is disintegrating, and then what that mind is seeing, both fantastical and horrific,
Mm.
as she descends into the dementia. Or you could see it as, something uh, spiritual that begins to happen as she transitions from life to death.
I was wondering whether you could tell us a bit about your character as well, and what was about this part that drew you to him too.
So spoiler alert, I'm dead. Omid is dead. So Queenie is played by Mira Sai, and Queenie is this extraordinary matriarch of a Bengali family. And her husband Omid probably settled, let's say, in England around the sort of late 60s, early 70s, when they were both around 23, 24.
Mm.
They proceed to have a hard time. They experience racism, prejudice, uh, degrees of poverty, struggling to find work. He's trying to be a chartered accountant. She eventually ends up with a food van. She starts selling food. She becomes a very successful chef. In the play, she is at the point where we meet her, the first Michelin-starred chef of Asian origin, female Asian origin. Um, they have three children, and eventually, in their backstory, Omid dies very early of a heart attack at 46. There is a certain fallout from that in terms of her grief, how that affects the bringing up of her children. That affects her children, who, when they die, are both something like 15, 12, and 10. And then when we sort of meet Queenie now, she's 68, 66, 67, 68 when she has the diagnosis. The children are all grown up, 37, 35, 32.
Mm.
So what, I suppose the long way round of saying again, what attracted me probably to the part is that he's dead. He starts coming to her. He's a ghost. He's not a ghost. He's a figment of her imagination. He's her memory. So as she falls again further into the illness and the disease begins to take hold, she begins to see him more and more.
Mm.
She begins to possibly conjure him to her more. Then perhaps once she's conjured him through the door, as it were, from the afterlife, uh, in a very real and a very poetic way, he finds his beloved, who he has lost many years ago, on the shore, just about to
Mm.
make that crossover. And he wants to help her. And he wants to help make that transition an easy transition. And perhaps it's slightly selfish as well, because there's a feeling that it's a rather excitable fella, and there's a feeling that he's keen to have her with him.
Mm.
He doesn't know exactly what, but he sees that she's close to death's door, and he wants her to come through that door quick and be with him now. And he also selflessly wants her possibly to avoid the protracted suffering and sorrow that she is going to perforce go through on her journey towards death as the dementia takes hold. And perhaps he wants to spare her
Mm.
that. So yeah, he's a very he's a live wire on it.
Mm.
In many ways, as we go into it more and more, and I sensed this when we first read the play, Tanika as a writer has obviously borrowed from her own personal history. Her mother died from dementia, and in many ways, uh, Omid is a character study, or at least has many personality traits of her father. And her father, as Omid is, was a very inspirational, joyful, artistic, cultured
Mm.
character. So he's a great force of life and nature within a play that deals with a lot of uh, death, anger, and sadness.
Yeah. I was wondering, playing a dead character, how does that, affect the way that you move on stage and interact with the other
I mean, that's
actors?
what I mean. He's not in any sense, don't get me wrong, a zombie or some sort of ghostly figure. When he is present, both in her life and perhaps, if you want to see it in that way, on some astral plane in which he is himself.
Mm,
Again, the really interesting thing has been the discussion that we're still having, even with the costume department, with the designer Rosa, with Mira, with Tanika and Pooja, about how he perhaps appears to her at various points during the play. So there are specific points where that you are back in the Calcutta bedroom with them, for instance, when they are 22, 23. We know specifically because they just got married. There's another time when she is actually in a care home, and yet for her, she has lost herself in a memory of her and Omit, 19 years old, in the Midnapore jungle near their homes. So again, at various points, and then when he appears to her at various points, he's appearing as the Omit that she knew throughout her life with the kids. So is he dressed in his favorite 60s suit at that point? And there's one point where he comes out of the ocean because he was a great swimmer. So obviously at that point he's in his swimming trunks.
yeah.
Uh, there's another point later on where perhaps he's the 80s version, the slightly older Omid that used to drink too much whiskey and party with his friends. So he morphs and through these different ages as she sees him.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that this is the first time that you'll be performing on the Dorfman stage as well since the Enchantment back in 2007, and I know that this will be the last show in the Dorfman until I think the middle of next year. I was kind of like curious to find out, what is it like, working in that space in particular, and how would you describe the Dorfman too?
That's just a lovely, intimate space. When we were in there just last, some of the cast members were pointing out that it has similarities to the Swan in Stratford-upon-Avon, which it does at the moment because Tori Hall's play is in there at the moment, and so it's in a thrust. So you've got that same sort of thrust as the Swan. And of course, the Dorfman, as with most of brilliant theatres here, they're completely adaptable. So ours will not be so thrusted into the auditorium as this play is. But yeah, it's wonderfully intimate, the most intimate of the three spaces,
Yeah.
obviously, which is great for this play because there are moments, as I said, of very moving, very real family drama. So you want to be able to play that intimately, I suppose. But it also has huge scope play as well. So you do have it. It's kind of deceptively vast. Having said it's intimate as well, when you open it up and you look at the back wall of the Dorfman, still a large space, still on three levels.
Mm.
You still have to engage, you still have to find your thoughts out in front of you as you do in most theatres. It helps to let the audience into what you're thinking.
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
yeah, it's a beautiful space. It's a beautiful space.
Yeah, I mean, you've performed in all three theatres
Yeah.
at the National. I was wondering, is there one that you particularly look back on fondly, and how different are the demands on you in the different spaces too?
It's a hard question. Which one do I look back on most fondly? I've enjoyed the plays that I've done in all the three spaces. I do. I remember very fondly doing a play called The Life of Galileo in the Olivier, which was directed by the wonderful Howard Davies and Simon Russell Beale playing Galileo. That was in the Olivier, and that was on a fantastic Bunny Christie set. And what was wonderful about the set as well, that we were on the Revolve. We made full use of the Revolve again on the Olivier and just were able to sort of like just so seamlessly transition between scenes, just be able to be so filmic in that theatre, the way the Revolve works and what that gives you. So yeah, I remember I loved that, and the Littleton. I remember doing an extraordinary Katie Mitchell, Martin Crimp play called Attempt on Her Life, involving an enormous amount of technology and use of Foley techniques with the actors doing all of that. So there was a choreography of camera cables all over the stage, and a la Bill Viola, Katie had three video screens that were descending from the top of the Littleton, on which you had sort of triptychs of video work that was live streamed from the cameras, plus a lot of live music that happened. So that was such, again, highly original, technical, unusual, brilliant piece of theatre. that both in its, again, subject matter, its originality, its challenging nature, and the way in which Katie presented it kind of blew people out of their seats a little bit in the Littleton. It filled that proscenium so boldly, so
Yeah.
bravely, so kind of violently that we literally did force people out of their seats and out of the auditorium on some occasions. But yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, you've worked at so many incredible theatres, throughout your career, from the National to, the RSC, the Young Vic. Would you say audiences are particularly different in, different theatres that you've worked into?
I think audiences are different all the time. I think audiences can be different from night to night. I mean, I know what you mean. I think there used to be perhaps, and perhaps there still is, if you're at the Royal Shakespeare Company, because you have so many tourists who come. Perhaps, yes, the makeup of a tourist audience being that it comes from, it is a global audience from all across the world, and perhaps they come with an expectation of what the Royal Shakespeare Company stands for and what they expect it to be. Perhaps there is a certain type of audience that you can hear a difference in and react differently. But again, that's not all the time by any means, and I don't think that's the case now or has been for a long time, because I think again what the RSC are doing is bold and original and different, and they are actively seeking to expand their audience and to bring audiences that do not traditionally come to the theatre back into the theatre to be seduced by how exciting live theatre can be.
Mm,
So I don't think that's good. Yeah, I think the demographic changes night by night. Every time I've done a show anywhere,
yeah.
it can be different from night to night.
Mm,
You can have audiences that are reverential, that take material very, very
mm,
seriously, that want to engage in a very sort of potent, quiet, contemplative way, and others that can view the same material and yet be quite riotous and quite expressive with the way that they engage. So I just think it changes depending on the
mm.
makeup.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. The first time I came to see you perform was in Ghost Quartet at the Boulevard, and it's been interesting to see, your history with musical theatre as well. You're doing things like Jesus Christ Superstar, and
Mm.
more recently, Tammy Faye, where you won your very well-deserved Olivier.
There we go.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations. That was an incredible show. Did you always feel like you had the ability to do musical roles as well, or was that like a turning point for you in your career?
Well, I was lucky. I was brought up with very musical, artistic parents. So I had it around me, whether I wanted to or not. Music was around me from the womb and post the womb all the time. So I can't remember my dad ever giving me singing lessons, but I think maybe I was genetically predisposed to sing. And then obviously I did do classes and learned a little bit, but I just always sang because it was always around. My dad was a singer. So I always grew up with singing around me. I was always listening to voices, listening to my dad's voice. I probably grew up impersonating my dad. I think to myself, well, when I think about how I first sang,
Mm,
I probably wanted to sing and sound like my dad. So that's how it came to me. So no, it wasn't surprise. Music was always such a part of my life and always has been, and was at college, was at drama school,
mm,
played all the time, sang with my mates, busked, and all that sort of stuff. So didn't I never went into the my career sort of, specifically thinking about doing one or the other. It's just that when one came up or the other came up, I was very, it was exciting to accept it. And it was the same thing. It was about what the material was that
mm.
was the primary cause of concern. And of course, when Superstar came up, there was, I didn't have to think about that. That was whether they gave me the job or not. I was going to be very, very excited to sing Judas.
Yeah, I mean, coming to Tammy Faye as well, I
Mm,
remember there was so much speculation over it. There was music by Elton John.
mm,
The book was by James Graham,
mm,
and they flew Andrew Reynolds over from the States.
mm.
I knew you were involved with the show, right from the very first workshop
Yeah.
as well. What was it about this show that drew you to it too?
Exactly, sort of what you just said. Elton's music, James
Yeah,
Graham's play, Rupert Gould director, and in a sense, the fact that it was going to be at the Almeida. So again, you're talking about such an intimate
yeah,
little cavern of a space. So to think about this musical and its subject matter and the music that Elton had written being in that space was very exciting as well. But primarily, brilliant music. From the moment that we started singing it in workshops and learning it, I just loved the music. Because I think for me, it felt like it was in Elton's kind of glory days wheelhouse.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The albums that I grew up absolutely loving, those ones from the 70s, those ones when he was making that transition into America, and being heavily influenced by American folk traditions. Well, that's sort of what that musical was full of because it was set in a time again of Americana where that was the gospel R&B rock and roll was the rage. So Elton was writing in that idiom. So it was brilliant music. And then James's play, so intelligent, so complex in terms of what it's again trying to say. That was part of the attraction to Jerry Falwell as well, because he wasn't just a villain. He wasn't just the baddie of the piece. There was complexity to him, however difficult a man he is in terms of what he believes and what came out of his mouth
Mm.
during that period and what he stood for. James gave him a complexity correctly because whether we agree with what he said now individually, he believed in his morals. He believed he was moral, that he was interpreting the Bible in the way that he saw. He didn't want to do harm to people. He didn't feel he was doing harm, however misguided that is. And I don't think you can play somebody who's a villain. You have to find something in them, as difficult it is with someone like Jerry Falwell. You have to find something that you empathize with, that you love. And he did have a genuine love and a genuine passion for Christ, for the story of Christ, for whatever he perceived as goodness and kindness. And I think he regretted. Some people would say that that was for political expediency, his regrets at later stages in his life. I don't know. I wonder whether that's true or whether he genuinely did regret some of the things that came out of his mouth.
Yeah. Did you know much about this movement and about
I
Jerry
knew about
Falwell?
Tammy
Yeah.
Faye.
Yeah.
I'd heard about Tammy Faye. I knew the story of Tammy Faye, not all the details of it. So again, finding out exactly what happened with Jim Baker, how the fraud was perpetrated, how he got investigated, and what happened with Jessica Hahn was slightly new to me. I in fact knew a bit more about Larry Flint and his problems with Larry Flint because I'd read something about that randomly, probably in a Larry Flint interview. Um, so yeah, I knew about Tammy. Again, I kind of avoided watching the Jessica Chastain film that was out sort of just before us because I didn't want to see Vincent D'Onofrio playing Jerry Falwell because I didn't want to be influenced by that. But again, the brilliant thing is you've got so much online again in terms of both what Jerry wrote himself, so I have his own words to teach me about who the man was. Then, of course, I have lots of footage of him preaching, of him being interviewed. So I mean, that's a blessing, a boon for an actor. I can see how he sits, how he moves, how he talks, the shape of his mouth, what's coming out of his eyes. So that's a very exciting thing to be part of, playing
Yeah.
somebody.
Was there an added pressure as well, playing someone who is a real person as well?
Yeah, there is to a certain. I mean, I don't know whether it's a pressure, but yeah, to me, yeah, I want to. I know that people can, I suppose, themselves go to YouTube and see that same footage. So I suppose to a certain degree, you go, yeah, well, people will be going, what's he doing with it? But at the same time, and Rupert and I talked about this, and all the central, Andrew talked about this as well, of course, as did we all. Are we trying to, are we trying to be exactly like them? No.
Yeah, of course.
Katie Braben is never going to look like Tammy Faye. Katie's gorgeous Katie. So we knew we were going to have wigs and stuff. So you're not trying to be lookalikes, or you're not trying to be exactly like them. You want to give a flavour of that person, and they had strong flavours.
Yeah, they definitely did.
Yeah,
And I guess, then coming on to doing A Little Life, last year in the West
yeah,
End,
yeah,
I remember it being such a challenging watch, over
yeah.
3 hours. How challenging was it for you, being in that space and telling the story eight times a week?
Yeah, very. I mean, as you said, it's very emotional material.
Mm.
Primarily, obviously, for James, but obviously for all of us, because all the characters within that novel and within that play are highly invested in Jude and in Jude's journey, are deeply in love with him. I think what I found most painful, which sounds strange, about the play was how full of love it actually is. So, I mean, for a play that is full of abuse and violence and self-harm and self-loathing, what moved me so much, and I think what I found so hard and painful, is that all those friends and all those characters surrounding him try so desperately to offer what they can to save that person, to offer the best version of love that they can, and they fall short. That's why it's so human, because they try and they fall short. And the fact that at the end of a little life, Jude is not saved, he is lost,
Mm.
and Harold is left with that loss, trying to continue to live his life. And in the conception of the play and the conception of the novel as well, trying to share that story then with the and why are they? It's again every night for me it would be a case, and Eva and I discussed this, that you're stepping out onto that stage with that narrative voice that Harold has both in the book and in the play, in order to try and share this story with every single person out there in the audience to say, perhaps you went through this, perhaps you are going through this, perhaps in hearing what it is like to go through this and we can go some way towards healing each other and helping each other. So it's that attempt at love and humanity that is so moving in that play and in the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a, as you said, it's a very human story, and it's packed with so many different emotions. Were you surprised by how in demand the show was, and how many people really wanted to come and experience the show over and over?
I wasn't really, because I think I understood right from my acquaintance with the book how beloved, how polarizing, how much of a cult moment that book had been, how much of a great writer Hanya Yanagihara was, what she had actually committed to page is such an extraordinary feat. So I knew that that book was greatly beloved. We already got the sense that there were going to be loads of people who were really looking forward to this event, this theatrical event, because of course Evo had already made this with Tonal Group Amsterdam, but this was the first time that it would be in the English language.
Yes.
And I think that, of course, as well is so interesting because this was going to be the first time that the play was going to be translated into English from originally having Cohen Tachelet and Evo having translated into Dutch. But of course, coming back to English, it is again in the language that it was first actually written in and in the language that the characters natively would have spoken. And then, of course, Ivo van Hove and um, and then the great actors that we had in that company. So
Yes.
not surprised, Carlos, not surprised.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been so wonderful talking to you. Just as a last question,
Yeah.
you've done so much incredible work over your career. What do you most want to be remembered for?
Ah, healing a divided world, uh, helping humanity to live in peace, love, without fear or hatred, and enough food to eat. I don't think that that's ever going to happen, but I can dream.
Very well said. Zubin Varla, thank you so much for joining us
Thanks,
today.
Carlos.